Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we have seen calamitous events again in Scotland this week. However, I'd like to wish Humza Yousaf very well for the future. I always found him a very decent man to work with, and there is no doubt that he was dealt a rotten hand. And whilst I don't want to dwell unduly on the private grief of the members on the SNB benches, I'll say this. I very much hope that whoever becomes First Minister will work with us on the issues that really matter for the people in Scotland, like public services and our economy, and will not continue to obsess with independence. Turning, Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'll answer questions 1, 5 and 12 together. This government is taking long-term decisions to cut taxes for working people and to grow the economy. The spring budget represented a significant milestone in the UK government's levelling up mission, with investment into Scotland bursting through the £3 billion mark. In addition, the Scottish Government will benefit from a £295 million funding uplift through the Barnett Formula for 2024 to 2025. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Adam Kaiser.
The reality is, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor's regressive spring budget left the people of Scotland behind, whilst in contrast, the SNP Scottish Government took the bold step of implementing a progressive tax scheme. The Westminster establishment argued that Scotland's income tax would somehow cause people to leave the country. Last week, however, it was revealed by this government's own HMRC that the opposite is true, with many more taxpayers moving to Scotland than leaving. So will the Secretary of State join me in welcoming this brilliant news and congratulate the Scottish Government who are standing up for the people of Scotland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady's point would be relevant if the report she's referring to wasn't from 2018 to 2019, long before we entered into 6 tax bans in Scotland versus 3 in the rest of the UK. So absolutely, I don't agree with her.
Speaker, the Secretary of State mentioning levelling up, which was curious. So we know that the budget is cuts to public services across the board, cuts to Scotland's capital funding, and yet levelling up seems to benefit places like, for example, the financial district of Canary Wharf, which benefits them by £16,000 per head. So is the Secretary of State suggesting that Scotland should accept austerity from this government, but not other parts of the UK?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's a ridiculous remark. The levelling up agenda in Scotland has been fantastically successful. And there has been absolutely no austerity. The Scottish Government received a record block grant of £41 billion, the highest since devolution began. And I'm surprised the SNP want to talk about budgets, Mr. Speaker, because the Scottish Government's budget put taxes up and they cut vital public services, so Scots are actually paying more, getting less.
Gavin Newland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What utter nonsense from the Secretary of State. The hypocrisy of this Tory party, who are busy gaslighting the Scottish public by complaining about cuts to capital spending, whilst the Tory government is busy cutting 16%, £822 million from the Scottish Government's capital block grant allocations is quite astonishing.
That is a record.
With Westminster holding Scotland back yet again, can the Secretary of State tell us, as Scotland's man in the Cabinet, if he argued against these cuts, and will he argue for the Scottish Parliament to have the ability to raise more in capital borrowing to mitigate these savage Westminster cuts and to help drive Scotland forward?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the fiscal framework settlement, we made it very clear and agreed with the Scottish Government that resource funding could be reallocated, if they so wished, out of the record block grant into capital funding, and that's what's happened. And there is additionally the ability to borrow £450 million if they're required to do so.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I begin too by passing on my best wishes to Humza Yousaf and his family. I always found him very personable in my dealings with him, although I disagreed with virtually everything that he has said or done as First Minister of Scotland, in particular putting up taxes and delivering poorer public services. Is my right honourable friend aware that businesses in my constituency are struggling to recruit employees from other parts of the United Kingdom because of these higher tax rates in Scotland, and that is damaging our local economy.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend makes a very good point, and I'm well aware, and businesses likewise in Dumfries and Galloway have said the same. 6 tax bans in Scotland versus 3 tax bans in the rest of the United Kingdom is not the way to incentivise people to go and work in Scotland or even to relocate their businesses to Scotland.
Shall Secretary of State Ian Murray?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On this International Workers' May Day, Scottish television journalists are striking for fair pay. I'm sure the Secretary of State will join me in insisting Scottish television get back around the table with their journalists to thrash out an acceptable deal. Given all the news that's happening this week, we need them back on the television. Can I also pay tribute to the outgoing First Minister Humza Yousaf, Mr. Speaker? We may not have agreed on everything, but his historic appointment marked a pivotal moment in our multicultural public life in Scotland, and I wish him well and his family for the future. Mr. Speaker, the spring budget was just another moment which exposed the damage done by the chaos of the former First Prime Minister's kamikaze budget. The Secretary of State has been spinning that it brings taxes down, but isn't it the case that the tax burden in Scotland and across the rest of the UK continues to rise? And now the Prime Minister wants to mirror his irresponsible predecessor with an unfunded £46 billion policy to get rid of national insurance altogether. Now, the Secretary of State sits round the Cabinet table, so which one have they discussed to pay for this? Will it be pensioners, the NHS or income tax rises?
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the honourable gentleman, I do agree with him that the tax burden in Scotland is too high and rising, and people are paying more and they're getting less, and I agree with them on that. Unfortunately, the UK government has taken the decision to partially offset that by not income tax cuts, but national insurance cuts, 4 pence off national insurance. And that, and to pick up on his last point, is an aspiration that this government has. It has already reduced national insurance by 4 pence, a third, and it would be an aspiration to remove it altogether because it's a tax on jobs.
£46 billion unfunded aspiration, and the Secretary of State or the Government won't tell us where they'll get the money from. Mr. Speaker, the truth is that Scotland is trapped between 2 chaotic and failing governments. We've had 3 Prime Ministers and will have had 3 First Ministers in as many years. All the while, the member for Aberdeen South thinks he is already the First Minister by calling the shots but shooting himself firmly in the foot. What is abundantly clear to the people of Scotland is that neither the Scottish or UK governments are even interested in delivering the change that Scotland needs. With neither government wanting to let the people decide, can the Secretary of State tell the House who he thinks is most scared of a general election, the Tories or the SNP?
Well, we absolutely do not fear an election, whether it's a Holyrood election or a general election. As I watch the Nationalists implode again, I say bring it on, I hear them say bring it on from a sedentary position. Bring it on, yes, bring it on, and just start, chaps over there and chapesses, start polishing up your CVs.
SNP spokesperson Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Might I also, on behalf of the SNP group, put on record our sincere thanks to Humza Yousaf for his public service over the months and years, and wish him, Nadia and his family all the best in their future. Can I also observe, Mr. Speaker, that fewer people in Scotland will see our proceedings today because Scottish television is currently blacked out due to a strike by television journalists. I implore the management of STV to get back around the table with the NUJ to improve their pay offer and try and settle this dispute. Mr. Speaker, in terms of the budget that was approved a few months ago also contains forward planning assumptions on income and expenditure over the next 3 to 5 years. Can the Secretary of State tell us what assessment he has made of those assumptions on the Scottish public finances?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the block grant, as I've said before, is a record block grant. It's running over a 3-year period. It averages out at £41.6 billion, and then there are Barnett consequentials that are added to that. And this year, that figure is £295 million, based on the spring budget's figures.
Tommy Shepherd.
So that sounds like no assessment at all, to be honest. The truth is that these forward planning assumptions, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, involve public service cuts of up to £20 billion. And that can only imply savage cuts to the Scottish Block Grant in the next 2 to 3 years. And sadly, these planning assumptions and the framework are endorsed by the Labour Party. So isn't it the truth that at the coming election, If people vote either Conservative or Labour, they are consenting to massive cuts in public services in Scotland.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course I don't agree with those figures. And what I'd say is that the public services in Scotland are in a desperate state, and at the budget the Scottish Government's just held, they froze council tax, and thereby pushing more pressure on local authorities to deliver those public services.
Bob Blackman.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 2 and 14 together. Scotland Office ministers have regular discussions with the Ministry of Defence on all matters relating to defence. Defence spending contributes significantly to delivering thousands of high-skilled jobs and investment in Scotland, and I welcome the announcement by the Prime Minister that we will increase our defence spending to 2.5% of GDP in response to rising global threats.
Bob Blackman.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer, and clearly it's good news for the United Kingdom and Scotland in particular that the 2.5% of GDP is going to be spent on defence. Will my right honourable friend update the House on the number of jobs that will be protected as a result of this decision, and indeed potentially the number of jobs that could be created in Scotland as a result of this decision?
Good point.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the short answer is that the increased investment announced by the Prime Minister will be focused on firing up the UK industrial base. The whole of the United Kingdom will benefit from this, ensuring our armed forces are benefiting from the latest technology. And both of those things will bring economic benefits and support jobs across the whole of the United Kingdom, as I've said, and including Scotland. And I just think at this time of heightened global tension and an illegal war in Ukraine sparked by the Russians, I'm confident that Scotland is going to play a growing role as the UK government ramps its spending up.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, I've been lucky enough to meet some of the amazing military personnel and civilians working at HM Naval Base Clyde. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the increase in defence spending announced last week by the Prime Minister will bring benefits across the whole country, whether at RAF bases in my own constituency or the many military establishments in Scotland, and is another clear demonstration that it is the Conservatives who can be trusted to defend and protect our entire United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely correct. It's the Conservatives that are trusted to defend the whole of the United Kingdom. In particular, I would just highlight the SNP who have consistently proposed abandoning our nuclear deterrent, including in their most recent independence paper. The irony is they want to be part of the NATO alliance, but they don't want to be part of a nuclear NATO alliance.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A vital part of defence spending is ensuring that military personnel live in safe and suitable accommodation. At last week's passage of the Renters Reform Bill in this place, my honourable friend, the member for North Shropshire, ensured concessions from the government on the standards of military accommodation. What assessment has the Secretary of State made on that in Scotland?
So I'd say to the honourable lady, she's absolutely right, and I think it's terrible. As the father of a serving soldier, I completely agree with her, and I know very well, and I hear from members of the military that they're disappointed with the standard of accommodation. I have raised it on a UK-wide basis. I have discussed it with the Defence Secretary, and he said the programme at the moment of improvements, which started before last winter, amounts to £400 million of spending.
Deirdre Brett.
Further to the Secretary of State's comments about nuclear bases, he's, I hope, aware of the alarming rise in more serious nuclear safety incidents at Scotland's Trident nuclear bases on the Clyde. My questions revealed 179 incidents were logged in 2023 and 24, including 6 with a risk of radiation leakage to the environment. The first category A in 15 years. Has he confirmed if there was an actual radioactive leak beyond safe levels for many of these incidents? And what reports will his government produce to reassure crew and those living nearby that the nuclear infrastructure is not, as one former Downing Street advisor described it, dangerously rotting?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've visited Faslane, our base on the Clyde. I can say it's an absolutely fantastic facility. We do not comment on matters relating to Faslane. If the honourable lady has any more specific questions, she should bring them to defence questions. But as I say, regarding our nuclear deterrence and our nuclear facility, we do not comment on things that happen there.
Alan Smith.
Number 3, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 3, 7 and 9 together. I am in touch with Home Office ministers regularly to discuss immigration matters that affect Scotland. This government has youth mobility schemes agreed with 13 countries, and we continue to remain open to new arrangements with our international partners, including individual EU member states.
Ms Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say I'm bemused by that answer. I will never shake in my view that Brexit was an act of gross harm against the next generation, particularly in Scotland where we rejected it. But we are where we are, and the EU has offered the UK a comprehensive youth mobility scheme up to the age of 30 for 4 years. That strikes me as a fantastic deal. Scotland wants to do it. Why is he so keen to hold Scotland back? But my actual question is he as delighted as I think he must be that the Labour Party completely agrees with him?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member and the SNP continue to obsess about Brexit and the decision of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. This government is absolutely committed to offering young people the opportunities to travel around the world during their education. That's demonstrated through our association with the Horizon scheme and also the government's Turing scheme.
And McLaughlin.
Mr. Speaker, the youth mobility scheme would allow young people in my constituency of Glasgow North East and across Scotland to participate in youth exchanges, work, study and travel across Europe. He got to do this. Is his message to my constituents that this freedom was for the likes of him, but it's not for the likes of them?
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government currently operates 13 successful bilateral youth mobility schemes with international parties. Now, the countries where we have arrangements with already include Andorra, Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Iceland, and India, Japan, Monaco, New Zealand, San Marino, South Korea, Taiwan and Uruguay. Now, the members opposite may scoff at these countries, but these countries are offering unique opportunities for Scots to travel internationally and learn, as many of us did as well.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think anyone in Scotland watching this will be incredibly disappointed with the responses that we've had from the Minister today. Now, in March 2021, the Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire West said on BBC Scotland that young people were not reaping the benefits of Brexit. Now, I don't often agree with my constituency neighbour to the south, but he was absolutely right then. He's still absolutely right now, isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, of course, the biggest obstacle to opportunities for young people in Scotland is the SNP government. It's the SNP government. Mr. Speaker, by restricting the number of places for Scottish students at Scottish universities so heavily, it seems intent, the Scottish Government seems intent on driving young people out of our country.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been involved in running a number of our youth mobility schemes. I'm fairly familiar with the concepts they involve, such as cap numbers, reciprocity, the idea that we don't have a large flow one way without the other, limited terms, no access to the welfare system, and the fact that you can't bring dependents with you, given the nature of them being temporary. Would you assure me that we still maintain our position that we had certainly under the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, that we would do this where it's in the UK's economic interest and where we know that the main drivers, for example, things like immigration abuse, just do not exist, as, for example, why we have the schemes we have with Australia, Canada and New Zealand, and that we maintain that open approach?
Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to my honourable friend's work in this area and his continued interest. I mean, the government's been absolutely clear. We have no plans to agree a EU-wide youth mobility scheme for the reasons that he has highlighted. But we are open to negotiating with individual member states, individual arrangements which suit the United Kingdom and Scotland.
Liz Twist.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has demonstrated its commitment to supporting households across the United Kingdom and in Scotland with the cost of living, with a £108 billion package of support, one of the largest in Europe. Inflation is now at 3.2%, less than half its recent peak, and is expected to fall to its 2% target one earlier than expected.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, according to the Scottish Parliament's own research, as well as the Fraser of Allender Institute, the Scottish Government's child poverty targets for 23 to 24 are not set to be met. Given the dereliction of their net zero targets and the widening attainment gap, Does the Secretary of State agree with me that they've given up on governing and on Scottish children's futures?
Mr Speaker, well, I agree with the honourable member that the SNP gave up on governing in Scotland a long time ago thanks to their continued obsession with independence and referendums. This government remains, the UK government remains absolutely committed to supporting households across Scotland, demonstrated through our increasing the working age benefits by 6.7%, maintaining the triple lock for 12 million pensioners, including and also our cut to national insurance.
Shadow Minister Michael Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I wish Humza Yousaf well for the future, but after a year in office coupled with a Prime Minister clinging on to power, nobody in Scotland is better off. Child poverty is up, life expectancy is falling, NHS waiting lists are up, drug deaths are up, homelessness is up, economic growth has flatlined. Isn't the inescapable truth that Scots are being failed by two governments for far too long? And does the Minister agree with me that what Scotland needs now is to be rid of both these distracted, incompetent and hopelessly out-of-touch governments?
Mr Speaker, I would certainly agree that the Scottish Government, the SNP Government, have not been focused on the day job, whether it's been neglecting Scotland's schools, Scotland's NHS or Scotland's transport network. They have not been getting on with the day job. But the harsh reality is, whoever is elected to replace Humza Yousaf as First Minister will still have the same obsession with independence and referendums.
Stevenson.
Number 6, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the Government's assessment is that our internal market is the essential basis in which businesses are able to trade freely across the United Kingdom, minimising red tape and maximising opportunities. In Scotland, 60% of outgoing trade is with the rest of the United Kingdom, more than the rest of the world combined.
The internal market is beneficial for all parts of the United Kingdom. It is, however, more important to those areas where there is a border. Therefore, would the Minister agree that the internal market should be very helpful in maintaining and developing economic activity in the Borderlands area, but would he also agree to consider a second Borderlands growth deal, which would certainly help the area on both sides of the border?
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The UK's internal market is essential to promoting economic activity, ensuring that businesses in the borders, in my own constituency, Carlisle and beyond, benefit from frictionless trade with the rest of the United Kingdom. The Borderlands Growth Deal, with a £265 million investment from the UK Government, was signed in July 2021 and is developing a range of projects to further boost economic growth.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Mr Speaker, when the BBC has headlines and web pages titled, "Why does Ireland have so much cash?" isn't the reality that independent Ireland is successful in the European and world markets compared to Scotland trapped in the UK? Ireland with a surplus of £8.6 billion to spend in their society, the UK has deficit and cuts hurting people. So can the Minister remind us, what is the size of the UK deficit?
Mr Speaker, I'm very clear that Scotland is better served by being at the heart of a strong United Kingdom. And the spending figures of the Scottish Government are very clear in terms of the dependency of it being part of the UK to support vital public services like the NHS, schools and the transport network.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald. Stuart Malcolm MacDonald. Right, let us move to Barry Sherman.
Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, water quality policy is a devolved policy matter in Scotland. The Scottish Government is responsible for biodiversity in rivers and streams in Scotland, not the United Kingdom Government. It would be for the Scottish Government to take action on this vital area.
Is it not the truth that Scottish waters and streams and rivers are purer and cleaner because the Scottish people rejected privatisation of water and, led by Scottish Labour, made sure that we had Scottish water in the public realm and delivered clean water for everyone?
Mr. Speaker, well, the honourable member is absolutely wrong. According to a recent report, untreated sewage has been released into Scottish waters and seas more than 58,000 times over the last 5 years. But only 4% of sewage overflows in Scotland are actually required to be monitored, unlike in England and Wales, where nearly 100% are monitored thanks to the efforts of this government. Unlike this government, the Scottish Government and Scottish Water are failing to take the tough action to monitor sewage overflows and protect our very important waterways.
Mayo.
Number 11, sir.
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to protecting free speech. It is the responsibility of the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament working with Police Scotland to ensure that the hate crime legislation is implemented and enforced in a way that protects freedom of speech and has the confidence of people in Scotland.
Jerome Mayo.
Mr. Speaker, the Scottish Government's Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act came into force this month. It's already having a chilling impact on free speech. So what lessons can the UK Government learn from the introduction of this poor legislation in Scotland?
Well, yes, and Police Scotland already have stretched resources, not least because they've been checking up on the SNP finances for the last 3 years. But Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right. We do have concerns that the legislation could have a potential chilling effect on free speech, but it's for the Scottish Government to speak to its own devolved laws. And for my part, I believe it's an awful piece of legislation. It lacks clarity as to what constitutes an offence. And importantly, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has made it very clear that the UK Government will not enact similar legislation.
Chair of the Select Committee, Pete Wishart.
Never before has such rubbish been uttered about a piece of legislation as been uttered about the Hate Crime Act. In 1 week, the Tories have tried to repeal this, and given that this mainly consolidates existing legislation, this will leave us unprotected against Islamophobia, racism and homophobia. Will he now issue one of his famous colonial decrees and tell the Scottish Tories to back off?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, those laws already existed. That's the important thing. Secondly, I was right about police resources. The 8,000 hate crime reports in the first week. That is more than was in any of the 7 preceding years. This is a ridiculous, unnecessary piece of legislation.